Hello, Serge. Hello, Kim.
Hi there.
How are you?
Good.
Alrighty.
Good. Welcome to Virtual Warwicks. I'm going to fill a little bit of time talking about what's going to happen tonight, just to give Facebook a minute or two to notify everybody that we are here and that we are live, and so that everybody can miss, if they come in late, they can miss me on my jabbering. I don't want them missing any of this, what's sure to be a great conversation tonight. So a little bit about Warwicks and a little bit about how you can participate today. We were talking in the group, both Serge and Kim are longtime Warwicks customers, and we adore that fact that they've been that for a long. We're going to actually be celebrating our 125th anniversary this year.
Great.
Isn't that awesome? So Nancy Warwick is the 4th generation owner of Warwicks. And so actually on Friday, we're all going to meet and we're going to start planning the party. So I'm sending out the invite to you two right now personally.
I'll be
Look
there.
for an invite sometime in the fall. We want all authors that have ever done an event with us to come and celebrate with us, because 125 years is kind of a big deal when you think about what the store has seen in history. I mean, we've lived through 2 pandemics now. 2 world wars, and so we've survived a lot, and part of it is bringing wonderful author, or part of our legacy is bringing wonderful authors to the community. So thank you both for being here for that. Couple things since the shutdown. Warwicks did open back up again pretty much about that as soon as we were allowed to from the governor. Nancy opened the doors, and we've done everything safe and social distancing and been keeping everybody safe. So we invite you to come into Warwicks and not only browse wonderful books like Waves and Beaches and Serges books. It's just, you know, we love having everybody look at the book section, but we also have another whole side of the store that's got wonderful things. So I think Serge, you were saying that you guys would have a La Jolla day and do some surfing and then come by Warwicks.
Yeah, no, it was our culture, nature and culture, right? So yeah, good stuff, because it's not that far from the beach, right?
So we love that. So tonight I'm going to be putting, so tonight I'm putting in Waves and Beaches into the comment section, so you can easily click on that. You can, when you order it, you can choose to pick it up at the store if you want to come and browse some other things, or we can ship it to you. And there is a way for you to participate tonight too. In that comment section, you could put in any questions or comments that you might have. I won't be bringing those live into the conversation. Kim and Serge are going to talk for about 35 minutes, and then I'll come back on the screen and bring those questions in at that point. So don't be shy and put some questions in there. So I think Facebook's had enough time to notify everybody, and we can all be chatting to them in the comment section too. We're recording this, so it'll also show up on our YouTube channel, but it'll also stay here on Facebook so people can come back at any time. So these are my quick, very pithy intros, because I had big long ones that I was going to read, and then the guys are like, no. So you can go and see their big long bios on our website, because we've got it, because these 2 guys have got some great things in their bios, and I wanted to impress everybody. But anyways, here we go. So Kim McCoy is an oceanographer and adventurer who has been seduced by beaches and observed waves on all 7 continents. As I said, more is on the website about all of the things that he's done. He recently competed in an Ironman and says he will continue to swim, dive, surf, rock climb, paraglide, there you go, until motion stops, viscosity ceases, buoyancy is overwhelmed. I love that part of your bio. And with him tonight is Serge Dedina, who we all know is the executive director of Wild Coast and the mayor of Imperial Beach. Gentlemen, it is an honor to have both of you here tonight to talk about this book. So have a great conversation, and we'll see you in about a half hour or so.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So super stoked to be here, and thanks for Kim and Patagonia, the publisher of this amazing book that Kim has behind him, Waves and Beaches. And so just a little bit of a story about how I got here, because Imperial Beach is behind me. I grew up in IB, started surfing in 1977 when I was in 7th grade. And I think 1979, I was in the 9th grade and learned that the city of Imperial Beach was going to build, and the Army Corps of Engineers, a breakwater project that would have obliterated this amazing hurricane surf that's in the background behind me. Mile-long breakwater, classic Army Corps project. And at 15, started learning about what I now know is called coastal geomorphology. And my high school teacher, Jim Knox, who became one of the first members of the Surfrider Foundation, board members of the Surfrider Foundation, Surfrider actually started, their first campaign was stopping a breakwater at Imperial Beach. And I was at Jim's house, which was cool. It's filled with surfer magazines and surfers. He was a lifeguard, just like the coolest teacher you could ever have, and an environmentalist. And he picked up this book called Waves and Beaches. And he's like, this guy, Willard Bascom, is super awesome. You've got to read this book. And of course, it was filled with cool pictures. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like, here's this cool book and this cool scientist that's jumping into waves on these boats. And it's all about how surf forms. I was still obsessed with surf. And so Doug Inman, an oceanographer at Scripps, was involved in helping stop that project and involving scientific expertise on why we shouldn't have a breakwater in Imperial Beach and why it wouldn't be a good idea. Never forget that. And fast forward to just not too long ago, maybe last month or so, and I talked to Kim and he's like, hey, would you like to help have this discussion about waves and beaches? I'm like, are you kidding? I still have the original copy. I have this copy I've had for decades, the original paperback. And by the way, that's how we got started in the breakwater. And I mentioned Doug Inman, and of course, Kim, you knew Doug, you know, a groundbreaking oceanographer well. So I'm stoked to be here. And obviously the ocean is what fuels me. That contact with the primordial blue, the wild blue, is what fuels me. So maybe talk about that. Do you even have a memory of when you knew it was all the ocean was the rocket fuel, or the, you know, that passioned your life to help you to be where you are today? And the author of update of this amazing book, Waves and Beaches, groundbreaking, important book.
Well, personally, I can't remember when I first remembered the ocean, because I was 9 months old when I crossed the Pacific. By the time I was about 7, I had crossed the Pacific twice, and the Atlantic twice, and the Mediterranean. And so fast forward till I was about 9, and I started body surfing in California when I was about 9, and then free diving, and you know, the other things are written about that. But so my relationship with Willard Bascom started out in graduate school when I used the first edition of Waves and Beaches. And of course, Doug Inman was in there. And well, when I started doing ocean research, it was in coastal wave dynamics, and darn, there was Doug Inman, and there were all these people who worked with Willard Bascom. So I hadn't met him at that point. I met him in the late 90s at a Deep Submersible Pilots Association. I'm sure many of you go to that, right? And it was in the late 90s. And we became friends then. And Bascom had diverse friends. He knew John Steinbeck, Doc Ricketts, Nelson Rockefeller, Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb. He knew Harry Oppenheimer from Diamonds in South Africa, De Beers. He knew Don Walsh and Jacques Picard from the deep diving submersibles, many more, including myself. Now, I was perhaps his last long-term friend, and I was sort of like a son to him. Well, it was mutual. He was sort of the father I never had, mentor I never had, and I fit right in with where he was in life. Anyway, we talked about many subjects, ancient history to reciting modern poetry. He was an impressive guy. He recommended using neoprene to Hugh Bradner for the wetsuit. And Bascom even had a multi-year legal suit with the CIA. The guy was fantastic, and I was super privileged to have crossed paths with him in that period of his life.
But what, I find it interesting because, hearing Julie talk about the history of Warwicks, and, my friend Mike Martino just wrote a groundbreaking book on the history of lifeguarding in San Diego County, in San Diego, but really talked about the evolution of beach culture. It wasn't really that long ago. People avoided the beach, right? They avoided going in the water. And you have this evolution of San Diego, but also Scripps, oceanography playing, and the scientists of Scripps playing such a profound role in our knowledge of the ocean. So maybe talk a little bit about why Bascom's book was so groundbreaking, important, right? Like just to help sort of the public understand sort of what was going on with these, when they were at mast at the beach and the storms were happening and the Army Corps was talking about projects, what was the role in that book in sort of educating the public about, the coast and ocean, waves and beaches?
Yeah, Waves and Beaches played a very complex role and fantastic role. It covered popular issues such as surfing, even alternative energy in the second edition. Natural disasters. I've put climate change into it now, but the first two editions it provided a fundamental understanding of how waves are created, how tsunamis propagate, very important, how ships sink, how sea level rises, and how tides fall. So these topics are, they have no international boundaries, and they're supranatural. They influence all the coastlines in the world, and there's hundreds of thousands of miles of coastline in the world, and it influences virtually every person on Earth in the 21st century. So Waves and Beaches had this sort of catch-all, but it has a view of the universe sort of from the coastline, and it was a unique view, and I think it captured the imagination and really inspired a lot of people from very diverse backgrounds.
And what was it sort of, you took on this project, obviously, in partnership with, Bascom's legacy and vision, but what was it that you add to the book and sort of really sort of, I guess, flesh out, that wasn't really there before. And I say that given the fact that I think it was important, what he talks about is coastline is a dynamic place, but sort of obviously the new element has come in, sea level rise. So, how does that incorporate into the book, and why was that important to talk about climate change and sea level rise?
Well, when Bascom, and also when I started in oceanography, we used, pencils and graph paper and slide rules. And now we use satellites and autonomous vehicles and that massive array of sensors. So we know a lot more about the ocean than we did then. And in the early 60s, it was really a remote science. And now people can interact with the ocean in vicarious ways. You can log on to 100 different websites and see robotic action and satellite views from the space station. And with all this data with all this vision comes a lot of data. So we have millions of data points today. And what I've done is I've woven a golden thread of what happens as we experience climate change and sea level rises. What happens to our coastlines? What happens to those hundreds of thousands of miles of coastline where people live, where harbors are, where railroad tracks run along the coastline, and where millions of people live in delta areas around the world. So I've tied in, sort of expanded the sphere of influence even into shipping, how today this web of commerce is really, the clothes we're wearing, this book was printed in Canada, but how most things come to us is in shipping containers nowadays. It's completely changed. And how we interact with the ocean is subtle, but continuous.
So, one of the things that I'm always fascinated by, and I was at a meeting that I run, a shoreline preservation committee by the San Diego Association of Governments, where it's full of coastal engineers and environmentalists and folks from the Navy, pretty much anybody that does anything to do with coastal management in San Diego County, including in Orange County. And there's discussion about issues in Oceanside and what they're going to do to help preserve the beach. And a longtime environmental advocate and lawyer, Marco Gonzalez, made a good point. He's like, hey guys, we're acting like this is new, like this beach erosion is new, but hey, this has been going on, just this problem has been going on for decades. But one of the things I'm obsessed with is sort of like what California or the English Channel looked like before the historic sea level rise. And to me, that was a fascinating part of the book and something I'm actually obsessed with. So maybe walk us through, we're talking about future sea level rise, but our coastline experienced and coastlines around the world experienced some pretty significant sea level rise that obliterated villages and human settlements and completely altered shorelines around the world.
With climate change, and climate has been changing since we've had the Earth. But the last 20,000 years they're a very good example of what happened. So 20,000 years ago, sea level was about 400 feet lower, 120 meters. So that means that in 20,000 years, things rose up 400 feet, 120 meters. That means the coastline 20,000 years ago was way out to sea. Any civilization that existed then is now underwater. And we've been blessed with about 4,000 years of very stable sea level. And that's allowed civilizations to arise and metropolises to develop in the coastal regions. But that's changing. So as the poles, and I'll use my hands, there's a pole up there actually in the map behind me. As the poles warm and ice melts, the glacial ice melts, sea level rises, and that causes the shore to creep up. Now, as you mentioned, it's something that is continual. People think, oh, it's going to happen next week, but it's sort of like a leak in your roof. You know, if you don't pay attention to it, eventually it really causes a lot of damage. And we have, you know, like the Del Mar train tracks you mentioned earlier there with the Sandag stuff. You know, they figure it might take 10 years to relocate those tracks and cost around $3 billion. Well, who's going to pay for it? Well, if you codified those things and said, oh, if sea level reaches a certain level, storm surge or any other, the city councils are entitled to act upon that. They don't have to argue about, oh, they're going to do it next week or who's going to pay for it. That's immaterial. They're allowed to act upon it. So they don't have to argue whether or not they're going to do it. So if you codify things, put them into law, that allow people to do stuff, because sea level is creeping along a few millimeters every year, about 3 millimeters a year here. In other areas, it's 3 times that rate. And so regardless of origin, you've got to put it into law. And, you know, for instance, we believe that we're prepared for war in the United States. We spent about $700 billion on the military. And, but sea level rise, this is a war too, it's just moving much more slowly. And it's around the globe, and it doesn't stop at any borders. So it's coming along very slowly, too slow for a human to observe. And some waves, as I mentioned in Waves and Beaches, some waves are so small and happen so rapidly, you can barely detect them with the eye. And other ones take so long to occur, they cannot even be observed in a human lifetime. So there's a broad spectrum of waves, and the sea level rise is just one of these things that's happening very slowly. But just because it's going slowly doesn't mean, just like the leak in your roof, doesn't mean it's not happening.
So, you know, talking about big waves, and I'm again obsessed with sort of, you know, these events, and then, you know, processes that impact surf and coastlines. And, you know, obviously it's one of them, sea level rise, historic sea level rise, future sea level rise. But let's talk about a big wave, and that's tsunamis. And we had a good discussion a couple of days ago, really about the impact, legacy of what happened in the Indian Ocean. I think it was in 2004. And then we just not celebrated, but marked the 10th anniversary of the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami. And so maybe walk us through what is a tsunami? Do we have to worry about that? And what were some of the global implications of those events, right, around the world? And they transformed a number of things.
Yeah, tsunamis are impulsively generated waves. And so you can have a landslide, gives an impulse, and it creates a wave. And you mentioned the Tohoku earthquake, which generated the tsunami that hit Fukushima. That altered energy policy worldwide. Because of that shutdown, the Japanese decided that they were going to remove nuclear power from their suite of power sources. The Germans followed suit when they passed some laws that they also were going to diminish the amount of nuclear power and eventually phase it out completely. And so now we've got a deficit of energy in some areas, some being replaced with natural gas, some with renewable energies. And the Fukushima tsunami caused the Japanese to actually create a special energy department, if you will, or a department under the Department of Energy, their Department of Energy, to specifically look at renewable energies and how do we remove our dependency on these energy sources that are subject to natural causes. And well, just a little segue, you know, we talk about wars and terrorist actions and all that, but unfortunately, more ships have been sunk by natural disasters, by storms at sea and extreme waves, than all wars and terrorist actions together. That's substantiated in peer-reviewed documents. And so we've got this biased view towards, oh, we're worried about all these things. We're funding it for $700 billion, but hey, we better start putting a few billion into these other things because it's creeping upon us like a Sherman tank moving really, really slowly, but a thousandth the speed of a tank.
And I know the Japanese have been, they have this sort of coastal defense system, not unlike Holland, and they put this big wall up where that occurred. But can you actually defend the coast against tsunamis? Is that a losing battle? I mean, do we just expect that it'll happen and there's nothing we can do? Because that gets to the next topic, the thing I'm obsessed with, which is storm surge. And I just gave a South by Southwest panel with Scripps Oceanography this morning, and was talking about surging seas. So, first, can we, is there anything we can do about tsunamis beyond predicting them? And number two, kind of talk to us about sort of the other event, storm surges, which, I'm thinking about Del Mar, if it's, or any coastline in Southern California on the planet, we get 5 to 10 foot of storm surge on top of a big surf. What happens?
Well, let me finish on the tsunami portion. Tsunamis are mostly geologically caused events, and there's plate tectonics and very complex geophysics involved out of my area of expertise. But there will always be tsunamis. If you look at Thera, Santorini in the Mediterranean, and the civilization was wiped out due to a tsunami. There's tsunamis all over the world, and these will continue to occur. So extreme tsunamis, there's really not much you can do. There's theoretically the side of the Canary Islands in the Atlantic could fall off and create a 1,000-foot tsunami, theoretically, across the Atlantic and devastate the west coast of the United States. And I think it was about 1 million years ago, there was a tsunami where the side of the island of Hawaii fell off and inundated the west coast of the United States. Of course, nobody lived there 1 million years ago, but so storm surge. Storm surges are more easily predicted than tsunamis. Unfortunately, they're much more frequent. And storm surge comes about through two things. One, you have wind blowing in a direction and it piles up wind up against, let's see, get my things here, piles wind up against water up against the shore a bit. And then you have waves, storm waves on top of that. So they go over. And if there's a dune over here that's been used for sand mining or four-wheel drive or something, this dune is lower. Now that storm surge comes up and over and it inundates what's behind that coastal dune. So protecting the dunes is one natural method of protecting against storm surges. A more long-term view is really don't build in areas that are susceptible to storm surges. I mean, we can predict, we can probably say with a fair amount of certainty that, Imperial Beach is not going to get a 20-foot storm surge. We can't say it won't get a 20-foot tsunami. So we can build and say, okay, we're going to build for the next 100 years with the expected level of sea level rise. We're going to have funding so that we build something that lasts 100 years. And that's relatively easy from a coastal engineering vantage point to build for. You just have to plan for it. But if you plan, okay, we had this big storm this week and we damaged the wall along La Jolla shores, that's not really going to help when you just go put a little plaster on it and you go, oh, look, it looks nice now, painted, looks really good. And that's not going to help. You need to step back. I mean, if you look at what happened at Avenida de la Playa in La Jolla over the last 10 years, I think they built it three times now. It's just the first couple of times didn't get it right. And the people at the Beach and Tennis Club, they actually have a very mature approach. They actually have set aside some funding for long-term planning for storm surge stuff. So there's a lot that can be done for storm surge, very little for tsunamis, but both of them, those problems can be addressed by just not building in the coastal zone as much and protecting dunes. Let dunes build naturally. And don't do sand mining up the coast, up the river, because that depletes the sand on the coast and hence starves the dunes. And then when that storm surge comes, it's your houses, your condos, your parking lots, your recreational areas are inundated. And the fresh water that's usually pulled out of those areas for farming and drinking gets inundated with salt water, and the aquifer gets too saline for those type of uses. And that's a subtle thing, but when it starts overtopping the dunes, there's a whole bunch of things that happen in estuaries and freshwater aquifers.
So, that's a good discussion, because I know that, in a lot of the discussion about sea level rise and planning for sea level rise in California, I think the California Coastal Commission sort of like led people to believe in, I think the process led people to believe that sea level rise is going to happen tomorrow. And there was a lot of folks, private property owners, et cetera, that got pretty upset about the idea. Well, maybe they have to lose, they may be, quote, be out of their house, in 3 years or something like that. And I think there's been an attempt by oceanographers like Gary Greggs at UC Santa Cruz and others to say, kind of like what you're saying, we have some time. There's a lot of things we can do in the meantime. And really, I think this focus on natural climate solutions, and maybe just talk to us a little bit about, I think you and I understand the whole sand mining and watersheds and the rivers that feed the ocean, but maybe talk to us a little bit more about that. Like, where sand comes from, why dam upstream might block sand flow, and then, right, the sand mining and how that impacts a beach, maybe at Torrey Pines, for example, or Cardiff.
Sure. Coastal, I'll call it coastal sediment, sand, we call it, comes from either a cliff being eroded, falls down and makes a coastal sand, or rivers. So the major rivers carry a massive sediment load. And when you deflect the flow of waters by building dikes and deferring the natural flow of water, the natural meandering of the river is interrupted. And so when you get a great rain on land, and we're getting these really strong rains, it pushes the sediments out to sea instead of weaving it along the shore and depositing it and then building those dunes in time. So when you interrupt the flow of sand by building a dam upstream, the major rivers, all the major rivers of the world, maybe the Mackenzie is the only one that flows in the Arctic, but all the major rivers in temperate areas have been dammed. Some of the water, it's depressing. I mean, if you look at the Colorado River, there used to be a big estuary in the Sea of Cortez, the northern end of the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. It's not there anymore because there's multiple dams and there's so much water that's pulled out to feed the purposes of industry and lawns in California, Arizona, and there's no water that flows into the ocean, into the Sea of Cortez anymore. That entire estuary, that entire fishery has disappeared that was there. So when people upstream don't think about what's downstream, there can be very serious repercussions when the delta starts to erode. And the Nile Delta is eroding, the Mekong Delta, the Ganges Brahmaputra on the border of India and Bangladesh. These places are getting decimated in some areas, and there's deposition in other areas. Well, unfortunately, you get the guy that gets the sediment, he's happy, but the person that doesn't get the sediment is pretty pissed off. And it's not fictitious about property being repossessed. When the shoreline, so let's say you have a slope of 1 in 100. So if the sea level goes up 6 inches, 15 centimeters in 100 feet, that's sloping 1 in 100. And it goes up 6 inches, you lose 50 feet of shoreline. It goes in 50 feet. Now the property lines are latitude, longitude, so they're plan views. So what happens is the definition of, in various jurisdictions, but let's just call it the low water mark. So that's the average of the low tides. That defines the property line. So when that property line is now in by 50 feet, who gets it? In the US, there's been several successful litigation cases where the federal government has actually assumed possession of the land. Not only the land, so this landowner loses the land, but they also lose their mineral rights below. And it's not fictitious, it's already occurring, and it will continue to occur.
And that's something that I really enjoyed reading, not enjoyed reading, but it really stood out to me, was describing what Encinitas used to look like, the coastline, and how much has been
Yeah.
lost. Maybe you could talk about that, because I don't think Encinitas is poised along Solid Beach to do a major Army Corps sand replenishment project. But I don't think people realize what their coastline used to look like. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, Doug Inman, you mentioned Doug Inman, was, I think, the first person to define littoral cells. So this little area where you have sand moving around. So you have this big conveyor belt of sand that moves sand along the beach. And according to old property records, Encinitas, which is a town just north of San Diego, used to have several more blocks. The property records showed these blocks were further to the west. And if you know the area, Beacons, I think, is a spot there, good surf spot. I've surfed there many times. Beacons, used to be further out because it's all eroded. So the cliffs collapse. They'll continue to collapse if sea level rises. And also, if the sediment flow is diminished from in that littoral cell. So what's happening to the north, I think between here and Long Beach, it's something like 40% of the coast has already been armored. I mean, some sort of human intervention protection. And so that interrupts the flow of sand. So suddenly you got this nice armoring and person feels really protected. And then what happens after 25 years, the whole thing collapses and the house collapses behind it. And then they go, oh, what happened? Well, sea level rise. So
yeah, and so one of the things I really liked, and I want to shout out to our friends in Ventura and my buddy Paul, who's been really focused on dam removal upstream in Ventura to get sand flow flowing again. That's been really interesting. And then trying to redo the point there to be more natural and rather than armoring it. And it got damaged this year because of all the big surf that we had. But one of the projects that I like is Cardiff, where Cardiff by the Sea in North San Diego County, Encinitas, where they've dredged the San Elijo Lagoon to take that sediment out to make the lagoon more productive, but then use that sediment for sand replenishment as well as to build the dunes up in front of the Highway 1, right?
Yeah,
so you
you've
get
done a
this
good job.
integrated and improving the highway, improving public access. So redoing the Highway 5 further east that goes across this lagoon to make it better for sea level rise and to have more, have the wetland become more productive. So really interesting sort of like, I think, project that really highlighted the fact that we can't, there are things that we can do, that smart stuff that help nature, that help people continue to access the beach, and then really deal with infrastructure, right? And I think you mentioned now with energy and, the idea that, we've got to move this infrastructure now, don't wait 50 or 100 years. There's things we can do now.
Yeah, you mentioned about building dunes and stuff. There have been many studies that have shown how much does it cost per foot, per meter of shoreline to armor it, to use different techniques. And interestingly enough, natural sand dunes is the least expensive. So it's not an issue of, oh, we want to be nature, we want to be tree huggers. No, it's just simply, if you want to save money and you want to have a long-term approach to this, let dunes grow. Don't do the sand minings. It's really, nature and humans, we respond to overabundance and underabundance. And so, nature is responding to our overabundance, responding to our CO2 and our groundwater uses. So nature will respond to that. It might be pleasurable to us and it might not be, but letting nature flow is the least expensive manner of doing it. We just have to listen to what nature has already told us.
That's great. I think a lot of us got that during this pandemic when I think a lot of people rediscovered the beach, right? Like nonstop. The beach is more crowded than ever.
If you look around the world, though, there's, as I mentioned, there's many hundreds of thousands of miles of shoreline in the world. Jakarta, Indonesia, the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, the Ganges Brahmaputra Delta, Kiribati in the South Pacific, in Denmark, in the north of Europe, and Malta in the south of Europe. All these countries are having issues with sea level rise, and you can't dissociate civilization from coastal living. It's all wound together.
So, and I think maybe this gets us to the future. So, we've got to figure this out, right? And we can do that. It's going to take some work. but just a little bit of an issue that I thought was interesting when you talked about Fukushima and then tsunamis and the changes in, nuclear power policy in places like Germany and Japan. And that's the focus, especially in Europe, on wind energy and now even potentially wave energy. And so that sets up the conflict between potentially ocean conservationists and coastal protectionists who want a pristine view of the coast, concerned about climate change, and the recognition that we may have to build a lot more structures in the ocean to get us out of the climate crisis that causes sea level rise, that destroys the very kind of things that we're trying to protect.
Yeah, the Danish, I think, are the foremost, the leaders in offshore windmills and, so power generation using the wind. And there are wind farms in the North Sea. There are wind farms off the west coast, east coast of the United States, or wind farms all over at sea. And these structures are in sediments of some sort. And that dynamic, that wind and sediment dynamic is extremely important. And we collectively on a global scale, we really need to address how we want to power our civilization and say, okay, we're gonna grow tomatoes over here, and we're gonna build wind farm over there, and we're gonna put solar cell over here, and a long-term approach to it rather than piecemealing it together. And if you're not addressing the root problem, you're eternally combating the symptoms. So we need to look at the root core problems and stop addressing the little short-term symptoms and go, oh, okay, we'll remove the problem. Now we're not going to have these array of symptoms. We'll have other problems, but at least we'll address the root problems and get rid of those.
Do you think Bascom would have been, and maybe I think you and Bascom were sort of what I call ocean optimists, in the sense that there is a strong belief in the role of technology and engineering and helping address these problems. I mean, do you think you'd be happy with the way we're going, or
well, I
sort of like, that's it, can't do it anymore, can't face this? What do you think about that?
He ran Squirp for a while, that thing out of LA for the sewage discharge thing. Anyway, Bascom, I knew Bascom quite well. I shared lunches and dinners and cocktails and friends and family, and I transited from being a student to collaborator. So I feel really happy, and I feel fairly well skilled at passing opinion. I think Bascom was an optimist about what can be done. Everything does not have an engineering solution, but nature, as I said before, nature deals with overabundances. And if you sit and think about what are the fundamental things, and such as waves, in the book Waves and Beaches explains what are the fundamental causes of waves and how they propagate and how they interact with the shore. When you understand those things, then you can start to go, okay, now I think I can project a little bit, a decade or a couple of decades into the future. And Bascom was phenomenal at going from one subject to the next and really completing studies. I mean, somebody should write a book about Willard Bascom. So yeah, I'm optimistic what humans can do. However, a structured approach, hard, just rigid, concrete approach is going to go nowhere except for spend a lot more money.
Well, one thing, and I think we're coming to the end of our discussion or time, but maybe we can end it this way and open up the questions. But one of the things that strikes me, and having spent kind of since I was a kid, knowing and being in the field with these amazing, scientists affiliated with Scripps and oceanographers, and I happen to, knew Walter Monk before he passed away, and was very inspired by Walter, and obviously Doug Inman, the role he played, and and just thinking about you is that there's this passion. Like, it's not only are you doing important work and you're making a difference, but you really love the work you do. Like I get inspired by that.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that. You've spent this life immersed in the ocean, doing important work that makes a difference, but you seem like you're having a lot of fun doing it.
Well, there hasn't been a single moment, I have to be honest, that I've regretted going into oceanography. Now, I'm an ocean physicist, study math and physics, but being in the ocean is fantastic. I've traveled all over the world. It's I'm super lucky. I landed in the right spot, and I knew Walter Monk for about 35 years, and Roger Vell, and I knew many of the luminaries, and they inspired me. Many of these people, I mean, look at what Roger Revelle did in the 30s and 40s. I mean, these guys had great fun. I mean, I was lucky. I went to the Arctic 9 times, and when I was first going there, I'd stand on the side of a rolling icebreaker and doing wild and crazy things. They'd arrest you for it today. Did an experiment on Black's Beach one time for a whole month, wearing relatively limited amount of clothing, but I was having a great time doing fantastic research, and I can't recommend it too much.
So any advice? Oh, well, there's Julie there. You
Oh, no, go for the advice question. What's your advice?
Oh, just Kim, and something I'm struck by is, the amount of kids that, college students and high school students that come to me and, they want to study oceanography. They want to study marine sciences. I think it's a big deal. And, in Imperial Beach or La Jolla, Coronado, just seen lots of kids go on. But what's your advice to those kids that want to maybe listening, that want to go on to that life of science and ocean research?
Well, first of all, and it's written many times in the book, go and see. Just get outside and do stuff, get involved. You don't have to get involved with yourself. You can do it all by yourself. You don't have to be involved in anything. Just go to the ocean, go sit and watch. I mean, there's, Waves and Beaches, the book Waves and Beaches, it combines science and emotion. It merges those two so that it's hard to differentiate where work and play and joy end. And just go and experience this. The ocean is not for all people. It's not an easy life going to sea. The book describes that in the end. And it's a fantastic, I'm preaching to the choir here, Serge, but I have no regrets whatsoever. I mean, the Waves and Beaches has about 150 references in the end notes, lots of things that people can dig deeper into. It also has some further reading. And for people that want to become more active, it has 10 or 20 coastal climate change related studies. So some of these things are almost 1,000 pages long, and some of them are just a couple pages long. So there's resources in there. You'll find one, if you're going to be involved in the ocean, you'll find something in there that'll give you a little spark in the sea, because there's so much to be found and there's so much more to do.
So that's a great segue. And Julie, thanks. And Kim, thanks. I'll just make it clear. If you love the beach and you hang out in the ocean, you need to buy this book. It's not, if you don't have this book on your bookshelf in your Zoom thing from now on, your street cred will be zero. You will have no ocean street cred. Any foundational oceanography lover, coastal scientist, conservationist needs to have Waves and Beaches. And you've done a remarkable job on this new edition. Thank you, Kim, and for a life of joy and ocean exploration. So
well, that's what I was wanting to do too. Looking at comparing the books, I want you to hold up the paperback that you have, Kim, and compare it to the hardcover that you've got behind you over there. I mean, what you've done in this, but the new edition is gorgeous.
Oh, maybe I'll look, see, it's the same size.
Yeah. It's, and what you put in there, I mean, the graph, the photos, the graphics, everything, it's just like,
well, that's Patagonia's production. Christina Speed was a designer of the book, and Carla Olson, who I think did a fantastic job leading us through these 5 years. It's really so. For those of you that want to visit Willard Bascom, unfortunately, Willard never really began the third edition. He died as a result of a car accident in the year 2000. And with his daughter, Anitra, we scattered his ashes in the surf zone of La Jolla Shores. So anytime you want to go visit Willard Bascom, go to the nearshore La Jolla Shores. He reigns there as Lord of the Nearshore.
Love that. That is probably a really good way to end this. We have lots of comments, people can't wait to read it. We have lots of comments in the site, but you guys did such a great job in describing everything. I always enjoy coming into these because I always learn something. It didn't even occur to me that the beach erosion and rivers having that
Big
relationship.
connection.
And it for whatever reason, I mean, it's my being naive, but it's just that was one of those aha moments as I was listening to you gentlemen. It was just like, wow, yeah.
And sometimes it's schizophrenic. The same municipality permits sand mining upstream, and they do beach replenishment downstream. Go figure.
Yeah, it's amazing. But the book is beautiful. And Serge, you were saying but I think any just lay person needs to have this book. If you're living on any coastal community here, up and down, San Diego County, this book needs to be on your table.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let me back this up. If you live anywhere in a coastal zone, and that's anywhere within 1,000 miles of the coast, you should have a copy of this book. If you love the beach,
actually, I'll go even further, Serge. I'll say if your watershed, the watershed in which you live, if you live in Utah, your watershed ends up somewhere, and it's either the Gulf of Mexico, the Pacific, Sea of Cortez, and likewise in Europe, in Asia, somebody lives in your watershed. And we all need to be aware. We don't need to ask what city you live in. We need to know, what watershed do you live in?
And I think that goes back to the issue of climate change. And a lot of people all of a sudden waking up to, they want to know a little bit more about what's happening with fire season. Why are we having these hurricanes become more destructive? And so they want to get that foundational sort of context, right? And I think this book does a great job of giving us that context for understanding what's happening at the beach and coast. So we get a little bit more educated, and we're entertained as well. It's an incredibly beautiful book and an important one. And I think it's important for all of us to get educated about the fact that things are never the same. They're always changing, and we need to understand that.
Well, and the other thing too, that, we've hosted a lot of professors on here too, you want to talk about mass migration is going to happen because of, so people are worried about migration and people, migrating across it's because of this. And this is, so it's going to affect all of us somehow, some way, no matter what.
There's about 500 million people that live at 10 meters or lower. That's 30 feet or lower. 500 million. That's a good number.
It's a good number.
Yeah.
And I think we in the United States sometimes think that it's like, oh, that's other people's problems. Oh, that's not going to happen here. We have this idea that it's in, like you're talking about Indonesia and some of those, it's like, oh, that's over there. This is all.
It's right here.
It's right. I can see. I can't quite. I'm only a mile away from the beach.
Well, there's a little. If I could just add a little segue with Walter Monk there, the La Jolla Shores is what the boardwalk. When they celebrated his 100th birthday, they renamed the boardwalk there Walter Monk Way, and he gave a very sage thing. He said thanked everybody, blah blah blah. All the city officials, and he said, unfortunately, unless we have a concerted international effort to combat climate change, Walter Monk Way, unlike myself, will not live to see its 100th birthday.
Pretty sage.
Wise man.
Yeah. All right. This was fantastic. Serge, Wild Coast. Is it wildcoast.org.com? How can people find out?
Wildcoast.org. We're an international team that conserves coastal and marine ecosystems and addresses climate change through natural solutions. We work from southern Mexico all the way to the Oregon border, even protecting La Jolla Shores and beautiful iconic places like the ocean off Black's Beach. So check it out. And we're really committed to protecting the iconic and beautiful places and wildlife of Planet Blue of the ocean.
Excellent. And then Kim, where can people find out more information of you, book? What's the best place?
Through Patagonia. Patagonia.com is the best way to get a hold of me. I'm a local, not too far from Works. And I want to thank John Dutton, the editor, and McKenna Goodman, and of course the entire crew at Patagonia that helped make the 3rd edition of Waves and Beaches a reality on today, the day that's being published. Thank you to Works. Thank you. It's
fantastic. We a great conversation, and thank you everybody at Facebook watching. And if you came in late, this, like I said before, this will stay on. You can rewatch it here at Facebook or go to our YouTube channel. The book I see some of you said, save me a copy. The book is in the link, or just go to warwicks.com, Waves and Beaches, and you can order it there. So with that, good night, everybody. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Julie.
Everyone. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks Warwicks.